Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my incredibly special guest, Jim Mellon. Jim has just written a book which is going to transform your life, both financially and health-wise. And I'm not just saying that because he's a mate of mine. I'm really excited by the stuff he said in this book, even though I don't understand half of it. The book is called Juvenescence, Investing in the Age of Longevity, and it's by Jim Mellon and Al Chalabi. And Jim, how would you describe yourself?
The bottom line is I'm a competent plagiarist of other people's ideas.
Yeah.
And this book is a reflection of that. So it's a kind of primer for people on this exciting new industry, which has only really come out of the shadows in the last 5 years, but which is going to be extremely important for all of us, you, me, and everyone else we know, basically.
I would describe you more sexily than that. I mean, you're kind of you're very, very rich. You're either a multimillionaire or a billionaire. You've got a private jet, which I've been in, which is really exciting. And you've spent the last 2 years researching this thing, haven't you? I mean, I think kind of like a lot of us, we're all reaching a certain age,
Yeah.
and we're all starting to feel it a bit and thinking, God, is that it? Is my life over now? And you've talked to all kinds of, I mean, how many miles have you travelled researching this book?
Well, I mean, apart from air miles, which
Yeah.
there have been plenty, my friend, your friend too, Anthony Bailey, and I drove around the US 7,000 or 8,000 miles and this year, talking to the key opinion leaders. They're known as KOLs in the sort of scientific world. And we met almost all of them, basically, and interviewed them all and have got insights from all of them, basically. So that's in the book. That's part of the rather science-heavy part of the book. And then at the back, there's other elements, including investment and a prescription for a healthy life based on what we know now, as opposed to what we're going to have in the future, basically.
Yeah, well, don't underrate the investment part of the book, because if your book is right, if we are going to all live much, much longer, then we're going to bloody need the money to keep us going. So,
too right. Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, when I started dipping into the book, I was half excited and half slightly frightened, because if we're going to go on living into our sort of 80s, 90s, 100s, and we're still going to be kind of compos mentis, we're going to need to find ways of keeping ourselves going financially through that period. But I mean, I was relying on the fact, look, I'm probably going to keel over, not too late, and so I won't need that much of a pension. But this book made me think otherwise.
Well, don't go, James. I mean, please don't
Thank
keel
you.
over. I think you've got a good chance of living to 110 or 120. And for most of that remaining lifespan that you have, you'll be in a healthy state. You won't be elderly, you'll be welderly. You'll be old, but you'll be in a healthy state. And that's the big transformative thing that's coming in the next 10 years or so, is that old people don't necessarily have to be dribbling in a nursing home chair, suffering from one of the 5 key diseases of aging and just going into a terrible decline, particularly with dementia, which is an increasing feature of the landscape. That is going to change. We're on the cusp of something revolutionary. And we're really lucky, you, me, and all our friends, family, to live in the first cohort, if you want to call it that, on the planet that is going to experience this. Because why is it today rather than 50 years ago or 50 years' time? It just happens to be random that we are the ones who are experiencing it.
Yeah, well, I do hope you're right. Can you just answer one question, which I read a section on male sex drive. And
yeah, you would
said,
ask about that.
And it said it goes through 3 stages: stud, dud, thud.
Yeah.
Which is a bit depressing, because probably I'm entering the dud phase now, and I noticed that in the book it said testosterone is actually not a good thing later on, because it kind of encourages you to get cancers and things. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's a sod, isn't it? Why did God do that to us?
Well, I do think God did it. I think it's part of the evolutionary process where the old and infirm are weeded out by evolution to make way for the new.
Yeah.
But aging and death are not predestined. It just happens to be that we haven't yet manipulated our molecular biology to allow us to overcome aging. But that's about to happen. Now, in terms of testosterone,
Yeah.
it's a fact that if you were castrated earlier on in life, or even later in life, you will live longer than, on average, than men who have not been.
But you're not recommending that.
Oh, I'm not recommending it, although sometimes I feel that it would be not such a bad idea. You know, that one might be less distracted, let's put it like that. Yes, exactly. And they've done multiple studies on this, that, you know, castrati in the old operatic days, prisoners who've been castrated for, you know, whatever purpose, live longer than the rest of the population. And if you've got dogs, and I know you have got a dog actually, and I love my dogs, you spay them or you cut off their balls, they will live significantly longer because they won't get reproductive cancers. So the burden of testosterone, the burden of estrogen and so forth, is that you get breast cancer in the case of women, or cervical cancer, or other forms of reproductive cancer. In the case of men, it's prostatic cancer, testicular cancer, which in the old days were very... You know, they carried a death sentence. Today, 99% of men who get prostate cancer are cured.
So how does one get the balance right between not wanting to lose one's sex drive, but at the same time not wanting to get cancer, sort of testosterone-related cancer? What's the deal there?
Well, I think the early detection of cancer is extremely important. It will become an increasingly important thing as they can now detect cancer years in advance of it manifesting itself in a nasty way.
Right.
The thing about cancer is that if you get really any form of cancer, and you don't detect it early enough, the cancer metastasizes. It goes to other sites in the body apart from the primary site.
Right.
That's where cancer is so such a death sentence. If you localize it, you can find it early on in a specific spot. It can easily be cured in most cases. All right, and so the detection of early stage cancer is becoming an increasingly important part in the armory of anti-aging strategies, basically. And so now a British company, as an example, can find lung cancer 4 years before it will show up on a CT spiral scan, and they can surgically intervene and take out the bad part of the lung, so to speak, and you will avoid getting full-blown lung cancer.
How do you get this CT spiral thing, though?
Well, the CT spiral scan is the one that they use now, okay, and most people don't get that. They're just using simple X-rays, by which time it's too late.
Right.
But the blood test that they're using, or that they're about to use to detect free-floating cancer cells in the blood, will be commercializable, I would think, in 2 or 3 years' time. And, of course, my own view, as I've said in the book, is that cancer will become a curable or chronic condition within 10 years. This is not going to be the death sentence that it was in the age of our grandparents, as an example.
Yes.
And cancer still is the second biggest killer on the planet after heart disease, but it will become increasingly less important. And the new immunotherapies, the early detection, the new surgical techniques are going to mean that when someone says to you, and God, I hope they don't, but if they ever said to you, you've got a cancer, unless it's something particularly intractable like a pancreatic cancer, you've got a very good chance of survival, and survival to a normal age, basically, which will be a very ripe old age.
When can we start smoking again?
I don't think smoking is really bad for you, because it's not just about cancer, it's about cardiovascular disease, it's about respiratory disease. You can't, is the bottom line. It will take 14 years on average off your life.
Right.
So one of the great things, and I know you would probably disagree with this, the arch libertarian that you are, is that government taxation policies, health education policies, and alternatives like vaping and all that sort of stuff are reducing the rate of smoking in developed society quite dramatically.
I like vaping.
Well, then stick to vaping. Vaping will not kill you.
I vape.
Good.
I vape now. No, so you didn't know that about me, did you?
No, there's a lot I don't know about you.
But I'm not convinced about your... I mean, you're actually supporting the kind of health Nazi approach of the NHS in terms of banning people from surgery and stuff, despite...
No, I didn't say that.
No. But you were sort of hinting that you didn't altogether disapprove of it.
Look, I mean, I think that if I said to you... you know, why not introduce your children to heroin at the age of 3? You'd be kind of very upset with me, all right?
I'd say Jim is such a card.
Yeah, right. And it's the same with tobacco, really.
Yeah.
Well, if it's a poison, and it's, you know, we would have banned it if we'd known what it was like in the 15th or 16th century, basically. But obviously, it became very ingrained in the system. One of the good bits of news for longevity is that the people who started smoking in the 40s and 50s are now dying off. A lot of them from lung cancer, which is the cancer is genuinely caused by smoking in 85% of the cases. And because only 10 to 15% of adults now smoke, the rate of lung cancer is going to decline and decline and decline. So you may call it health Nazism, I just call it sensible stuff. And sugar is the other one that I would tax very heavily, and try and reduce its consumption, because almost all the diabetes that we've seen in the Western world and now in the emerging world comes from excessive sugar consumption. And there are plenty of good alternatives, by the way.
Can I ask you? I'm not personally. I don't know whether you stand on this issue. I'm not a fan of the NHS particularly. I think that I'm more scared of iatrogenesis, iatrogenetic problems. In other words, doctor caused problems than almost the disease. Oh my God, I'm dying.
Well, that's if you give up the smoking, there'll be no problems.
I've told you I vape now. I don't smoke.
And that's good.
No. What I wanted to ask you was, you talked about these things being available in a couple of years' time, these developments.
Some of them.
Some of them. Okay. What can one do in the private sector, not too expensively now, to spot cancers coming and things like that? Is there anything we can go and do? Or don't forget, we've got American listeners as well, and maybe it's easier for them. But
okay. Well, I mean, in terms of apart from healthy living, which is fairly obvious, right?
Yeah, sure. And getting a dog, we've established that.
Getting a dog is going to add to your life. If you give up smoking at the age of 60, as an example, having smoked for most of your whole adult life, you'll add 4 years to your life. So it's not too late, even if you're a bit older, to give up. But, as revolting as it might sound, the finger up the bum for the man is a very important thing.
So
to
prostate
check.
cancer.
Very important. Colonoscopy is absolutely vital for anyone over 50, possibly 45 years old, because they can spot colon cancer really early now by just going up with the thing up your bum, basically. And they can take the cancer out. Now, colon cancer, once it's established itself, it's too late. You're going to die from that. Okay?
Do you know what? You've made me...
You're going off to have that checked.
I am going to go and have that checked. Well, I'm over 50. You wouldn't believe it to look at me.
No,
but
definitely not. No, I would never believe that.
No.
But why not, James? We want you around to 120, and I've had it done a couple of times, and it's uncomfortable. It's not disastrous. Basically.
Some men would pay for that experience. Kind of.
Yeah, it's only a very thin tube. It's not going to replicate the real experience.
Okay,
right now.
fine. Okay. So colonoscopies are important. Any other kind of cheap ways that we can save
so a mini aspirin, I've talked to you about this before. That's an aspirin that's 75 to 81 milligrams. You go to Boots and you just say, I want a daily aspirin. Right. Take that every day, 3 weeks a month, and a week off because it might have stomach problems attached to it. Okay. That will reduce your chance of a heart attack by between 50 and 80%, and ditto a stroke. So why would you not take that? All right. So the mini aspirin will cost you, I don't know, nothing. Coffee for a whole year's worth, basically. And then there's a drug which is prescription only, which is used by diabetics, called metformin. Metformin is a glucophage. It goes around the system and it takes out sugar. And metformin for people who have diabetes will add 8 years to their life. We don't know how long it will add to people who don't have diabetes, but it's definitely pro-longevity. Has no toxicity. It's been around since 1957, used by many millions of people. And I would urge everyone who's got a friendly doctor to get them to prescribe metformin. So the combination of those, just very simple strategies, will make you live sufficiently long that the really exciting stuff that's coming down the track will be available to you because you'll still be alive, basically.
We'll do more of that in the next section. I just wanted to ask you a bit more about this metformin and diabetes, because lots of people of my sort of parents' generation, I mean, like my uncle, for example, has got that diabetes that you get when you're in your sort of 60s and you've been drinking and stuff for most of your life. What causes it?
Well, drinking doesn't cause diabetes, by the way. Well, it depends what you drink, but to put this in context, a can of Coke, regular Coke, has got 40 times more sugar in it than the equivalent size glass of red wine. And it has 10 times more sugar than the equivalent size glass of white wine. So drinking can cause problems. It can induce cancer. It can cause some cardio problems, but it's not going to. It's not going to give you diabetes.
Sugary drinks. What?
Sugary drinks of all types, except those that have stevia. And there's a green can that Coke makes now that's got stevia in it. Right. Stevia seems to me to be an extremely good non-burdening of the system type of sugar substitute. But all the other sugar substitutes like saccharin or aspartame and so forth are bad for you.
Yeah.
So if you want to drink a fizzy drink the Coke with the stevia in it, Stevia, but absolutely avoid regular Coca-Cola and the zero type Cokes and stuff like that, because they really are, they're the cause of obesity, they're the cause of diabetes. Now, let me put that in context, all right? In 1984, 1% of the Chinese population had diabetes, and almost all of those were type 1. Those are the people who inherit diabetes, have a genetic defect. Today, the population that has diabetes in China is 12% of the general population, right? It's 12 times up in not that long, right? Yeah. Within our lifetimes. And that's all down to Western diet, particularly the consumption of sugary drinks. So it's totally reversible, type 2 diabetes, if you just don't eat a lot of sugar. Simple as that.
Because there must be lots of people in your world, the world of finance, who... There was a sort of phase when people used to have 3 martini lunches, and that ended. And then a sort of new breed of sort of super banker type emerged, where they just drank Diet Coke all day, every day, and they just drank coffee, and they thought, I suppose, that they were being quite efficient and healthy.
Yeah, and probably it's the opposite, because they have more stress. Stress is a big killer.
Right.
And they have less fun, presumably, than the 3 martini types. And but I can't say that martinis are going to be very good for you, because they put a big burden on your liver. You can get cirrhosis by drinking too many spirits. But honestly, my recommendation is drink some red wine. Don't be ashamed. Don't be worried about drinking some red wine. It's not bad for you. In moderation. It certainly won't do you a lot of harm, and teetotalers live 4 years less than the general population. So that's telling you something about the positive effect of alcohol as opposed to the negative effect.
Do you ever
drink?
Obviously, you're going to have a pretty good idea of exactly how to be healthy. Do you ever get drunk?
I haven't been drunk for ages. I have been many times in the past, but not.
But I mean, in the last year.
No, not really. Merry. I think that's the best way of putting it.
Okay, and so what gets you merry? What would you need to get merry? 2 martinis?
I don't drink those, so...
Ever?
No. So maybe a bottle of wine?
Right. That's okay. So you're allowed a bottle of wine.
But we have a mutual friend, and we won't mention his name,
yep.
who drinks 5 bottles of wine a day.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, so he's obviously putting far too much of a burden on his body. But I think a bottle of wine won't do you too much harm.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and my girlfriend was very virtuous. She told me this morning that she hadn't drunk for 36 hours. So that goes to show this sort of the dependency that some of us have on, you know.
I'm totally with your girlfriend. I literally cannot remember when I last had a day without alcohol. I think it's really immoral not to drink.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
And our colleague who's sitting with us, Anthony Chow, is definitely a believer in that.
Good on you,
especially before he gets on his scooter at night. Someone's got to bring the averages down on the longevity stakes.
You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very incredibly special guest, Jim Mellon, talking about how to live longer. More tips in a moment.
Hey folks, I want to tell you about Breitbart News' Second Amendment newsletter, Downrange with A.W.R. Hawkins. Features the top gun stories of the week, every week, and guest columnists like Gun Owners of America's Larry Pratt or Armed American Radio's Mark Walters. Also features a review of a firearm or firearm accessory each week. The newsletter downloads on Thursday, comes right to your email inbox. You can subscribe at breitbart.com/AWR.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my incredibly special guest, Jim Mellon, co-author of a book called Juvenescence, which you're going to want to read because A, it's going to probably make you richer, and B, it's going to make you live longer if you listen to some of the tips in it. And I'm not even doing some hard sell here. I mean, it's bloody obvious. If Jim is a guy who can afford to spend 2 years, just like the rich dilettante that he is, going round talking to all the world's greatest experts, he gets access to these people, he finds out the truth, I take what he says seriously. So Jim, what else do we need to do to live longer?
Okay, so think of it as 3 bridges.
Yeah.
Okay, and the ultimate bridge is the one which is going to take us to an unimaginable lifespan. All right. The first bridge is just staying healthy today, and we talked about a bit earlier about some of the drugs you can take now, some of the simple strategies to allow you to get to the point where the science has developed to take us to 110, 120, and that's in the very near future. And those drugs, broadly speaking, change our molecular biology in a rather primitive way. So an example of that, if I may give you an example, is something called a senolytic drug. All right, a senolytic drug takes the senescent cells in the aging body out. All right, now these senescent cells are those that are between healthy functioning and death, or apoptosis as it's known scientifically, and they sort of sit there without any useful function, and they become bigger and bigger percentage of our total cell count as we get older. Now, they are the ones that cause all the tissue inflammation, all the metabolic disease in older people. So you talked about your uncle having diabetes in his 60s. Some of that will be the result of senescent cells. So if you can take out the senescent cells, and they can do it in animals, they live 30% longer, the mice, if they have their senescent cells removed. They look much healthier. They have nice fur. They don't get grey hair and all that sort of stuff. So that's one thing that's pretty close to commercial development. And there are a number of other ones, if you add them all up together, will make you live longer. At the same time as that's happening, the 5 key diseases that kill 70% of the people on the planet, you can guess what they are: heart disease, cardiac...
The one that almost got me, lung...
respiratory disease, are being addressed one by one. The one that's very difficult to address is Alzheimer's, but even there's some promising news. And so they are killing 70% of the people on the planet, and as cardiovascular disease declines, which it is rapidly, and as cancer declines, and the combination of those two kill about 25 million people a year on this planet, then we're going to see an improvement in longevity, whatever happens. But so the 2 strategies for the second bridge are disease reduction and the diseases of aging, or the mortality reduction and the diseases of aging, coupled with some very simple strategies that are available today. But the next and biggest and best bridge is the gene editing, stem cells. You've heard about all these things, organ transplantation from animals into humans, and whole tissue regeneration, which are coming down the pike. Some of them already exist. Now, if I just very briefly wrap up on this, I published a book in 2012 called Cracking the Code, all right, which was my first attempt at writing a biology book. Since then, CRISPR-Cas9, which you've heard about, which is the gene editing technique that is now sweeping the world, which allows you to edit bad genes out and put good genes in with terrific accuracy, had not been discovered in 2012. And yet here today it is doing miraculous things.
I remember 2012. It really wasn't very long ago.
Precisely.
Yep.
Cancer immunotherapy had not been discovered in 2012. It wasn't in the market. And now it's going to account in the very near future for almost all cancer therapies.
Immunotherapy is using the body's own immune system rather than sort of bombarding cancer with nasty chemicals. It teaches the body to focus on particular spots, doesn't it?
Absolutely right. And the results in not all cases, but in many cases, are biblical. So you could be on stage 4, which is the last stage of a really horrible metastatic cancer, and these immunotherapies can bring you back to healthy life. So what they're working out now is the combination of immunotherapies that are going to be personalized to your own body. And as I said earlier, we're going to see a huge reduction in cancer deaths in the very near future, if not now. Cancer is already being pushed back. So you've got those diseases are being cured, and that's all happening since 2012. The other one is hepatitis C. All right,
which is a bugger. I mean,
terrible. Huge number of people in the US had it, 6 or 7 million. Of those 6 or 7 million, half have been cured now because there is a drug out there that you can take for hepatitis C, and it completely cures you. It doesn't just, make it a chronic condition. You are completely cured. It's
and
a
it wasn't
drug.
Available.
It hadn't been invented in 2012. So in 5 years. Now, add on top of that this longevity science, all right, which is only just coming out of the shadows, as I said, but is going to be very significant for all of us. And then the development of artificial intelligence, which again in 2012 didn't exist.
Right.
And artificial intelligence is going to be really important because we'll be able to develop compounds using artificial intelligence. In fact, they already are doing that, which will be very specific to developing pro-longevity drugs, which would otherwise take, thousands of man-years, if not millions of man-years to develop. Add all those factors together, and you can see why it's not so stupid to say that average life expectancy in 20 years' time will be 110 or 120. So that's like you waking up in the morning, and instead of having 24 hours ahead of you, you've got 36 hours ahead of you. That's the big difference. This is all happening in an age of accelerating technology. They'd call it the age of acceleration. At a time when lots of stuff is being automated. So the public policy issues are quite incredible around this. And you mentioned money. Well, I wouldn't depend on any government or any company pension plan because they're all bust. So
yes,
you need to make your own investments. And James, you hit the nail on the head. I couldn't put it better myself, which is that if you want to live this long life, if you believe you are going to live this long life, the best investments are in the companies that make that long life possible.
Well, I want to do that in the last section, but I wanted to rewind a second to these things that kill the senescent cells. Where do I score some of these, Jim?
Well, you can't yet because they're not on the market. They won't be for 3 or 4 years.
Can I not even get them on the dark web?
No, well, you probably know about that better than I do, but in fact, I'm sure you do. But the stuff that they use in the mice is not going to be appropriate for human consumption, so just wait on it. But it's coming out look, you're young, you're
5
fit.
years?
Yeah, 5 years, I would say. Yeah.
Yes. But the companies manufacturing those are going to be worth a buy. Yeah?
They are, but they're not. They're private companies at the moment. So
they're not in your investment tips, any of those?
Well, we've listed all the investments that you can make, but most of them are private at the moment because this is a new industry. This is the big drug companies are not paying much attention to it yet because obviously their models are all about trying to cure you of diabetes or Alzheimer's or something like that. What these companies are trying to do is to cure you of the fundamental and major disease that we all suffer from the day that we're born, which is aging.
I was going to say, let's, in this section, just deal with, I think, the disease that people are more scared of than anything, more scared of than cancer, and that is dementia.
Yeah.
We've seen what it does to people, and we think anything but that.
Yeah.
Now, is it ever going to be reversible?
It's an extremely good question. Now, if you're 70 or 80 and you've already got what are called tau protein tangles or amyloid plaque build up in your brain, it's probably too late. All right. Although there are people who die without Alzheimer's who've got lots of amyloid plaque, so it's not particularly well understood. But again, early detection is going to be very important. So if in your 40s or your 30s, you have a genetic, it's found that you have a genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's, and there are genes that are implicated in Alzheimer's, like APOE4, and it's but in about half of cases hereditable. So if your father or mother had dementia, you're more likely to have it than the general population. And they can treat that early, so they can do something to put you on a drug that will stop you from building up these plaques and tau protein tangles. Then that's one step in the right direction. But so far, the drug companies have all focused on treating people who are already far too far advanced with dementia.
But how do you get those tests then for?
Well, you can have your genome sequenced, and there are what do you call it? The genes that are implicated in Alzheimer's, and if you have those, if you have an overexpression of those genes, then you may be more likely to get Alzheimer's.
How much does it cost to get your genome sequenced?
About less than $1,000 now.
Which is probably worth it, isn't it?
Do you remember you talked earlier on about the NHS and doctors and you're not trusting them, all that sort of stuff? Yeah. I think you have, look, many doctors are great, some are not so good, some are crap. But the bottom line is that in a few years, not that many, doctors will be receptionists with big computers behind them. They won't be providing the prognosis or diagnosis. They will be basically saying what the computer tells them. And I fundamentally would trust that more than a human being who was trained 30 years ago, who's seen lots of patients but hasn't done any further study, basically.
Yes.
And in the same way as I'd probably be happier in a plane that was flown by autonomous means as opposed to by a pilot, or a train that was driven by a non-human, the same is going to apply to doctors, and that's why it's not a profession you would recommend your children going into.
It's interesting that, isn't it? I can't remember who the American sort of techie guru who said that actually the degrees that are going to be valuable to do now are not computer science degrees, they're arts degrees, because everything else is going to be written off by technology.
That's absolutely right. So what you do, which is human interface, all right, a form of empathy.
Yeah.
Although I've read some of your columns, right? Okay, and is going to be much more valued than jobs like lawyers, accountants, and so forth, which can easily be automated.
Arts degree,
absolutely. And so, but the best example I can find in that area, and one to invest in, is social care, because at the moment the people who provide social care, like your granny or whatever, is being looked after by someone who's badly trained, badly paid, badly motivated. Those people will become much more valued, and that whole industry, in my mind, will become much, much more important. And so I'm looking at that as an example of a pro-longevity hedge, effectively.
Interesting you say that. My beloved grandmother, who died recently, aged 103, I think, but spent her last years, inevitably, in a care home. And it was in the Midlands, in Stourbridge. And the people who looked after her were all kind of, I suppose what I call salt of the earth, Midlands working class. And they had no mentality which said to them, this is an undignified job, I shouldn't be doing this, I've got a degree from uni in My Little Pony studies, therefore the world owes me a living. They were very happy doing a job, working with the old ladies. They go to all their funerals and stuff, there's a good relationship. I think there's going to be a gap between that generation, who looked after my grandmother brilliantly, and this ghastly new generation of over-educated kids with a sense of entitlement who think that caring services, which I think are a brilliant thing to do, are a waste of are beneath their dignity. Well,
they're the ones who'll be playing video games for the rest of their lives and depending on handouts, because those, I don't know what the common word for them is, snowflakes.
Yes.
Are I agree with you, they're ghastly and constantly moaning and voting for Jeremy Corbyn, and they will just find that the world has no place for them. They are a lost generation, and overeducated I think is the wrong word. I think they've been put through education that has no value, basically.
Yeah.
I think, and doing coding studies, by the way, is a complete waste of time, because computers will do all the coding. Why would you learn, something that is really is much better done by the machine? Why would it's rather like doing the London taxi thing at the moment, the knowledge. Why would anyone do that knowing that it's a dead industry, basically?
Well, unless because they know that they're going to be protected from Uber by government regulation.
I don't think that won't last very long.
Jim, I can see already we've set store there for about a dozen future podcasts. But
I'm very happy to do them.
Yeah, no, because you're really interesting. I have to say, on behalf of the beloved listener, my special friend, I think you're really interesting. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my incredibly special guest, Jim Mellon, author of Juvenescence.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
Let's take Barbara in Maryland.
Black History Month pees me off every year.
I promise you, I am not going to stick on old talking points. I am not going to stick on the things that everybody else always talks about. I'm going to give you real links to Black history so we can clear up all of that distortion, and maybe we can actually have that real discussion about keeping our history relevant.
Sonny's Corner, Saturday at 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my incredibly special guest, Jim Mellon. We've dealt with all the health stuff, how to live forever. And you can buy his book, Juvenescence, so that'll tell you all the rest in lavish technical detail. Now we're going to cut to the chase. Jim, we need to make some money to keep us going through our old age and keep us in all the sex partners that we can now afford with this new lease of life we've been given.
The robots.
yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Right. So let's look at the things that are going to be disrupted in the bad way. All right. So pensions. If you're a pension company like Standard Life, as an example, I'm not singling them out for special treatment, but they have probably made guarantees to people about the pensions being paid for the rest of their lives post the age of 65 or whatever, that they won't be able to fulfill, because people are going to live so much longer than expected. And those companies are going to face very severe financial problems, in my opinion. The same thing goes for the life insurance industry, which is going to be completely upended by this.
So you're saying you'd sell all your life insurance company shares?
Definitely,
yeah,
and also pension providers and so forth, unless they've made investments that are kind of pro longevity as a hedge against that. I mean, obviously, not every company is a sell.
Right.
On the positive side, think about what an aging population wants to consume. They don't want to consume Snickers bars, as an example. They want to consume.
They quite like sweeties, actually. Older people, don't they?
Well, those who've got teeth left. But
yeah.
I think that as an example of what will just go up and up and up in terms of value and proliferation are cruise ships. Because if you think about it, you put your elderly relatives on the cruise ship, it's basically like a mobile care home. You can send them off on a round-the-world cruise. They like to go on cruise. It's a lot better than sitting in some sort of nursing home somewhere. And there's going to be more and more customers for them. So I'm an investor in Caribbean cruise liners, as an example. And I think that's a great long-term strategy if you're going to play that. But obviously the real money is going to be in the technology, the biology, the drug companies, and so forth. There's only one or two drug companies that have got this message, all right, that are big, that are investable and conservative. That one is Novartis, the Swiss company. It has a nice dividend yield. It's relatively cheap. I think that's a good one to put away for the long term. And our own dear GSK here in the UK, GlaxoSmithKline, is also another one that's beginning to understand that this is a very important future industry. But in the meantime, most of the companies are private. But what you have to watch, and I'm very happy to update you as time goes on, the most promising ones, some of them will go public, and at that point, investors should participate. Because this is going to be like 10 times the size of Facebook, Google, and all those sort of companies when we're successful with them, if we get any successful investments in that area. And I'm super psyched about it. But at the moment, there's a paucity of investable choice that is directly related to change.
Yeah, you've said before that you think that this particular market is the most exciting thing. I mean, it's bigger than tech.
It's going to be bigger than tech. I mean, healthcare is already the biggest industry on the planet, bigger than tech. But it's not it's not efficient, all right? So, I mean, if I give you an example, I was in Hong Kong 10 days ago, and there was a man on a panel that I was listening to in this conference from Hong Kong, and he said, here in Hong Kong, we have the highest life expectancy in the world. I don't know if you know that. Everyone thinks it's Korea or Japan. It's Hong Kong. And we have the lowest expenditure as a percentage of GNP on health. So in other words, they're delivering from a small amount of money very high healthcare outcomes. And so they spend 5% of their GDP on healthcare. Here in the UK, we spend about 10, just under 10%. And in the US, it's 20%. And the US has the most lamentable life expectancy out of all the G20 countries. And
where does the money go?
Well, a lot of it is over-intervention. So, for instance, if you're in the United States and you're having a baby, they're almost certainly going to recommend a cesarean because there's more money in it. Far too many pills. And pills sometimes act against each other, sort of the burden of drugs, excessive drug consumption.
Like Mr. Burns, all his diseases are do you watch The Simpsons?
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't watch
References.
television. I only listen to podcasts by James Delingpole.
Okay.
But basically, money doesn't equal good outcomes.
No.
Is the bottom line, and especially on a mass governmental, societal way. There are things you can invest in stem cells and in gene editing, which are very interesting, but they may be a little bit too cutting edge at the moment. There's a company in the US called Editas, which is about $1 billion company. It's traded. We've got some shares in that. I really like it. But maybe it's too speculative. I don't know. But I think that's a good one for the long term. There's a company in Australia called Mesoblast. It is a leader in stem cell technology. They've got phase 3 readouts coming out, which means that they're very late stage in terms of their drug development. And I kind of like that one as well. I met with them when I was down in Australia, as I just mentioned. But there are few and far between public companies for the general public to invest in. So, but what we're trying to do, our own business, is to have our own products to basically fund the development of new drugs ourselves using the artificial intelligence machine that we bought into.
What's your own business?
It's called Juvenescence, fun enough, Limited, and the partners that Auntie and I have are, seriously good drug developers.
What, can people invest in your...
No, they can't, no not yet, but it will go public, probably at the end of next year, and I'll let you know all about that.
Right.
But we raised a friends and family round. It was about 5 times oversubscribed recently, and it looks very good, yeah.
Oh, very exciting. And actually, while I've got you, Facebook. Should I short Facebook?
Well, we've talked about, the trading, and unfortunately you can be absolutely right on something, but timing is everything.
Yeah.
And my own view is that Facebook will be regulated, and
please,
the
God.
burden of regulation will be very high. Facebook is also one of these industries where the consumer is also the buyer of the service. And sooner or later they're going to be made to pay for that data, I think, anyway. And also, I think my general view is that talking to younger people is that they're just bored of it. There's other things out there. So, yes, I would say short Facebook, and I think you could short Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. You could almost certainly short Amazon, which is a shareholder-funded charity, basically, for the benefit of consumers. But the timing is everything, and they're going to continue to produce good numbers for a while, but one day it will just go like that.
Yes.
And Schumpeterian destruction is accelerating. So
Is it?
Well, Facebook itself displaced a whole load of similar companies when it came out.
I mean, I'm interested, obviously not just for financial. I mean, I've my brief experience of shorting is that it's a very expensive hobby if you do get the timing wrong, because the upper limit is limitless, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
And we had our friend Simon Corkwell on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he wisely advised people to short Tesla, and that's going very nicely. But Simon is a very, very cool customer. He has the patience to watch the red on his IG index screen going up and up and up, and he doesn't care because he's got confidence in his position. But
yeah, I mean, Simon's a very good friend of mine and of yours, and I'll just tell you a little story about him, about his appetite for risk. When I was in Australia last week, I sat next to some guy who's an expert in racing, and I asked for the tip on the Melbourne Cup, and he actually gave me the winner.
And I bet on it as well.
Rekindling.
Yeah.
Because I told Simon about that. It was me that told Simon. So Simon won £125,000 on that horse because he puts a lot of money on.
He does.
And I won £13,000, which puts it in contrast because I just didn't put enough money on.
And I won 300.
Well, so that's great.
Yeah, isn't it?
So you can trace it all back to a lunch in the Melbourne club in Australia, just before the race, basically.
And thank you, Rekindling, for that one.
Thank you. What was his name again? I can't remember. Michael something or other. Michael Ramsden. Yeah, who's also an old friend of Simon's. But so Simon's appetite for risk is great, but most people can't take it. And I think shorting. You don't need to short. You've got lots of things you can invest in that are going to go up over the long term.
No, but the second reason I want Facebook to go down is all that lot, Google, Amazon, they're all part of this very nasty anti-liberty, anti-free speech, basically, if you're a conservative, and I use the word in its broadest sense, they don't understand your arguments, so they're quite happy to shut you down. And that worries me.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not as familiar with all this stuff as you are, but I would say that in the case of Google, as an example, they put $1.5 billion into a company called Calico. Calico seems to have gone absolutely nowhere, and it's in exactly this longevity area. That's what it should be doing, and they hired some good people. Some of them are leaving. The chief scientific officer left today to go and work for GlaxoSmithKline on a salary of £10 million, by the way, and it just says, they're doing stuff on a whim because they can, but not because they know anything about it. So don't depend on them to cure the subject of aging. They're not going to be able to do it. You're going to need scientists who understand drugs to do that, and who understand molecular biology. And so tomorrow we're going up to Oxford. We're talking to some experts in cell biology, because that's much, much more important than lines of code. The coding is just not relevant to this particular problem. And these guys think they can cure everything by software, but they can't.
Well, thank you for a very happy, generally uplifting podcast. I think it's got lots of good news for all of us. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my incredibly special guest, Jim Mellon, co-author of a wonderful book called Juvenescence. Until next week, bye.